Developing an effective team is a really important part of any manager or leader's experience in the workplace. And I guess that most of us will have experienced the difference between working for an effective team and working for a team that's really not all that functional. There's a huge difference between the two, both in terms of the hard-edged performance indicators, but also about how you feel about going into work and the enjoyment that you get from going into work. So what I'm going to do is to talk about how you might aim to develop an effective team. There's no magic bullet, there's no foolproof way of doing it, but there are some techniques and some tactics that you might want to think about which should help you to get to the point where you think you're heading up or managing an effective team. The first and probably most important aspect of developing an effective team is about setting your agenda out clearly. Often, dysfunction within any team or workplace setting is about a lack of clarity, people not being absolutely sure what it is that they're supposed to be doing, not being sure what the long-term strategic aims and objectives are, or not being clear about how it is that they assist the team in getting to the point where the strategic objectives are being delivered. But let's stop talking in jargon, let's just talk about what that really means. If your team members understand clearly what the objectives are for the team, and if, furthermore, they understand what the individual contributions are that are needed in order for the team to get to those objectives, chances are you've already got a pretty effective team. If you haven't, think first of all about that agenda. Does your team know, do they understand what it is that they should be doing, what the priorities are, and where the main emphases need to be in terms of how they do their work and where they put their time, their energy, their skills, and their attention? Listen to your team. Everybody in your team will have a view and an opinion on what's working well and what's not working well. Sometimes they may have got it wrong, but chances are, for the most part, they'll have a pretty accurate view and a pretty accurate picture in their heads about the efficacy of what they're doing and whether or not it's working. Sometimes managers and leaders can assume too much responsibility and think that the entire responsibility for what the team does rests on their shoulders. And whilst it's clear that they perhaps have most of the responsibility, if you're going to share it out on that basis, if you don't allow your team to contribute, to help to shape the direction and the priorities, then you're missing such a big trick. None of us should be employing people merely as automatons or robots to do whatever it is they're told to do. I think we should be encouraging people to bring all of their skills and talents. And if you're confident as a manager and a leader that your judgment can be questioned, that you're open to suggestions from your team, most teams will respond really positively to that. Nobody likes to be treated like an idiot. And sometimes you hear in the workplace people saying things like, "You're not paid to think, you're paid to come here and do a job." And that kind of phraseology, that kind of instruction makes me very nervous about the ability of an organisation to properly harness all of the skills and talents of its workforce and to use it to best effect. If you are able to trust and have confidence in your team, and that trust and confidence is well placed, you'll get an awful lot more out of your team than just the individual contributions that people can make. You will start to develop a sense of team spirit, and that will lead to the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. But you'll only do that by listening and by placing trust in people. However, it's important to confront the difficulties. I've described, to begin with, a fairly positive, pink and fluffy version of team working, but most of us have also worked in a team where the team, either as a whole or individuals within it, positively militate against having an effective team because one person or perhaps a minority of the team present behaviours and attitudes that can be very destructive and can prevent the team from functioning well. Here is my rule number one. If you ignore the problem, it won't go away. It's very unusual that just ignoring difficulties, tensions and problems within a team mean that it'll all get better. there needs to be an honest appraisal of what's going on and the ability and the courage, frankly, to tackle people or individuals who are not being particularly helpful as you're striving towards this development of a more effective team. So you need to be able to confront that problem. Now, you can do that in a couple of ways. You might want to do it with an individual, but it's worth thinking about presenting it as a problem for the whole team. If everybody in the team is aware of where the problem or the tension or the difficulty lies, then this won't be any surprise to them if you, as the manager or the team leader, raise it. And actually, the solution is more properly held within the team itself, rather than in the omnipotent being, who is the team supervisor, making a pronouncement about what the solution might and should be. So give the team the courtesy of allowing them to work out what the solution might be. If they struggle with that, be prepared to facilitate the discussion, be prepared to put your own views and opinions into the mix, of course, but it's not just your problem. And for team leaders who assume the entire responsibility for the functioning of their team, it is A, exhausting, and B, unlikely to work as well as harnessing, again, all of the skills and talents of the team in general. And peer pressure is a very, very powerful tool. So to summarise that section that we've just covered, I would like to say that there are two elements to developing an effective team. And one is giving confidence and trust, being positive about your team, rewarding and acknowledging good results. Don't ignore good results, because those are important to acknowledge. But equally, don't leave difficulties and tensions and hope that they'll go away of their own accord. So it's both paying attention to the good stuff and the bad stuff, and most teams will respond well to that. When you're thinking about developing your effective team, most teams will be part of at least a three-way stakeholder engagement process. So as a team leader or as a manager or a leader, wherever you are in the organisation, developing your effective team will rely on those three main stakeholders. That is, each individual within the team, each of whom will need some personal attention and acknowledgement. The team as a team, so how well does it work together? How good are the outputs? How well does it perform in relation to group objectives and group responsibilities? And thirdly, and by no means last, the organisation as a whole. Your team will only be part of a much bigger organisation, probably, and therefore to ignore the interests and the agendas of any of those three main stakeholders is dangerous. And it's one of the big management tricks. If you know how to set the agenda for your team so that you are also including in it the agenda for each individual stakeholder, you're much more likely to be successful. If your individual team members understand what their contribution to the team is, they're more likely to be able to deliver it, and you will be able to establish fairly quickly whether or not they're in agreement with it. We've all of us, I think, found ourselves in a position where we've been doing things that we're not altogether sure about, and that's difficult. It can be managed in the short term for short-term projects perhaps, but I don't think that we can sustain that as individuals long term. Equally, each team within a larger organisation will have responsibilities in relation to other teams and to the organisation as a whole. If your team's objectives and principles and its philosophy don't align with the overall organisational objectives and philosophy and values, there will be a disconnect and it will feel wrong. So, in order to make sure that you don't diminish your team's effectiveness, you need to have as much alignment as you can possibly get between the team, the overall organisation, and then, moving backwards for a moment, the individuals within it. The greater the alignment, the greater the sense of congruence, the greater degree of understanding and satisfaction people will get from working in that kind of environment. Another key point, I think, in developing an effective team is allowing your team to make mistakes. Most of us learn best from mistakes. experiential, experience-based learning is the most effective learning for a fairly high majority of the population. So it's important that you allow your team to make mistakes, provided they learn from them. If your team is making the same mistake repeatedly, something has gone wrong. But a degree of risk-taking, a degree of creative thinking, a degree of doing it differently may produce brilliant results long-term, but you may have some hiccups in the short term. It's important to allow that to happen. And finally, have some fun. If people don't enjoy their work, they won't work as well. It's as simple as that. And I believe that teams that can enjoy the experience of working even when things aren't going well and are able to leaven the bread with a bit of humour are the teams that work best. To summarise, if you want to develop an effective team, make sure you're clear about the agenda. Make sure everybody knows what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Align your key stakeholders. Make sure you pay attention to individuals, to the team itself, and to the larger organisation. Allow your team to make the odd mistake, provided it's not repeated, and have some fun. And good luck.